We are June 6, 2019, with the Jewish Historical Society of Western Massachusetts. I'm Ken Schoen. I'm here to interview John Clayton in the presence of his home with his wife, Sharon Dunn. So let's begin by finding something about yourself, John, that you'd like to share in terms of about your life, where you are.
I've always seen myself as a Jew, and I've always seen myself as a Jewish writer. But I come from a family which was only, in a weird way, Jewish. My father was a non-believer, and his father was a non-believer, a socialist in Chicago. My mother came from an Orthodox family in Rochester, New York. They were both. My father was born in Canada when they first came from Odessa. My mother was born in Kishinev, near Kishinev, in Bessarabia, and came here as a girl of about 9. But she really didn't pick up a lot of, like, for example, I think I read somewhere that on Friday nights she would light candles, but they weren't Shabbos candles. They were memorial lights, as if every week somebody died. And for her, Judaism meant something to do with suffering, and it gave her a chance to weep. She would take me to synagogue, and I did become a bar mitzvah, but it wasn't from a lot of depth of going to school or anything. So when my mother would be there, especially when there was a yortzeit, she would go to synagogue, take me, but then kick me out before the Yizkor service. And I'd go outside and talk to God. I'd go to the anteroom behind the sanctuary, and talk to God. So that's a background. And every Seder, there was no Seders in my house when I was a child. There was no going to synagogue in particular, even the high holidays. Although often we did, just my mother and me. My father had no connection at all. When I grew up, then I would, with friends in Indiana or friends in New York, I would go to a Seder. That was the extent. And one time, well, let me go. I've said this in a couple of places. Sharon, my wife Sharon, said when Aaron was a young kid, like 2 years old, look, either he needs a religious education, either with you in synagogue, or I'll take him to the Friends Meeting House. I said, no, I'll take him to synagogue. So I tried to go to synagogue myself, and it seemed silly to me, foolish. I didn't believe in God. I didn't. It didn't connect, and it was a long and boring service in Hebrew, which I didn't understand. I couldn't even read the letters. And what am I doing here? And then I'd stop going again for a month or two, and then I'd try it again. And finally, it came to me when I was carrying the Torah scroll around the synagogue. I started to cry, and I felt like I was holding something that had to do with my whole tradition, my whole life, my people's life, and so on. And that I had come close to disowning it. So it was important to me. And I sat there. I didn't put the scroll with its two spindles into the holes of the chair. I sat down in a chair and just held it. And then when I when the Torah service was over and the scrolls were going to go back, I carried it with a kind of vibration in me, but not with tears. And then I talked to Sheila Weinberg, and I'm sure you've had some similar experience with Sheila, and she was so wonderful, and she said, "Well, come to my office." So I went to her office, and I said, "Well, I don't understand. What am I doing here?" She'd go like this. She'd use her hands to sort of affirm what I was saying. If I was speaking about God, I don't believe in God. She'd go like this, and like as if, "Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I know what you mean." I kept blabbering, and finally she gave me some books. Books, very cleverly. I don't know if she was conscious of it really or not, but it seems clever in the retrospect. She gave me more and more difficult books as I went on. And then I started using my newfound Jewishness in my fiction. But the themes were there before and after. When I said I don't want to write about a Jew who's just coming back to Judaism anymore. I'm tired of that. And I'm going to write about nothing to do with Judaism, like joy, the story of joy that you mentioned in your note. It's not a Jewish story, but it's a Jewish story. That's the story of the old lady who comes to a therapist, and the therapist recognizes in himself a lack of joy, and in comforting or trying to comfort, although comfort is a question in the story, it's not clear that she doesn't really want comfort. But he finds something that ennobles the ordinary world in a religious way without being specifically Jewish. That story really moves me. It's as if in all these stories that I've learned from them, from the writing, but they're no longer mine. They're just like, they're a story that somebody wrote. So I can even look at it and say, "Oh, this is terrific. This isn't so good." And it's...
I've noticed that in your stories, that you write like a third person looking at the story and telling the story like,
and then here I'm this story, I'm going to do this, like in The Builder.
Yeah.
In The Builder I do that. So there's a kind of metafictional, so these are not sentimental stories, and they're metafictional at times, not always. At times they do that. So I say, I'll stop and say, "No, here I'd like to say, I want to do this, I want to say this, I want this to happen." But the story, is fighting me. It's like I want to write a nice sentimental story, and the story won't go there. So in The Man Who Could See Radiance, Peter Weintraub, first when he starts to see beyond the visible and palpable, the radiance that connects everything, it's all beautiful or sad, but then it becomes terrifying, and he's afraid to go further with it, so he backs off and keeps that to himself and only lets it out with his wife, with his child, a little bit, carefully. And slowly, because it was necessary, the vision faded. He wept at odd times and for no reasons. The vision came to him less and less the next few months. Finally, not at all. And sometimes he thought it was just chemistry. And sometimes he thought, I know what's under there. He took up his work again and was careful what he said. So after a while, he was able to wave his arms while listening over the headphones to Mahler and the others shook their heads and grinned, relieved. Weintraub was back. And he was able to fight with Jack Myers, and when he talked with Joe Ferris, didn't see more than Ferris wanted him to see. Didn't see with his heart. He saved his heart in a safe deposit vault and brought out small sums when he could, especially for Rachel, and for their children. That theme of finding some kind of a vision in which the world is, that there's something underneath the visible world or the concrete world, but that it becomes too dangerous and that he has to be careful of it. That keeps coming up.
Of that journey?
It's just a way of expressing the holiness that lies underneath the ordinary. And it's there. I mean, I can bring, it's as if I feel sometimes I could bring God into this room. But I can't, I wouldn't say it really. But that there's some kind of a, it's like, when do you experience God? Now, here, with you, right there. And then in the builder, so God is there, simply there. Nothing fancy for Michael, no choral music, no auras or penumbras, no mescaline tricks, just God. For me, then I step back from the story. For me, the word catches me in the chest and makes my breath pulse, blood thump in my temple. For me, it's almost erotic. I feel the danger of the word God. But for Michael at that moment, it's ordinary, always there. He just hadn't known how ordinary. And there's a lot of that in my stories. But when the sense of the presence of something, of another way of seeing the world, I think became overt after working with Sheila and studying, and using that lens. But the experience has been there before I was Jewish again.
You're about to Shuva, so to speak, when you say I'm Jewish again.
Yeah, it's like a Baal Teshuva.
I want to read you some things that you wrote. I do find in my early stories hints of a longing for the holy, a longing that since become deeper and more real to me. It's part of an unfashionable search for the meaning under things.
And meaning sounds essentialist. Sounds as if, there's a meaning. And what's hip right now is that there's no meaning. There's not even a question of meaning. The meaning, to question it, is even in itself already fallacious. So, and I don't believe that. So my stories are always, in some way, assume a kind of meaning underneath the ordinary world.
It seems to me that, I think you're right about this in your preface, that in terms of meaning, that God, in many of the forms of Judaism now, is not the major force. It's not central to the force, to the prayer, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
It feels like we don't talk God.
And that's right.
We get into the thing, he, she, it, that, we don't get into like the relationship. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The question is, how does one go to shul and get out of the robotization of the service and make every experience, so to speak, holy, which I think you probably do. But how does one do that in an atmosphere that may not be conducive to it because it's people getting together and they're people?
There's an awful lot of tikkun olam without any quality of holiness. And tikkun olam, you could do ethical culture. In fact, ethical culture was a Jewish device. Creation. Yeah.
So,
but it becomes necessary to avoid. I don't really talk much about God. Talk about feelings and about perception, but not mean there are only a few places where I name God and talk about God. No, maybe more than a few.
yeah. So, the essence is to strive to be holy in this life, to get deeper meaning, to get the meaning under the meaning.
Yeah.
And holiness, as you envision it for yourself, or for the Jewish, for yourself, is to do the mitzvot, which, as I understand, means to every day get up and daven, to put on tefillin, and to pray, and to have a connection with God.
And for the last 25 years, I've been doing that. Now with my Parkinson's, in the morning I am so wiped out, so exhausted. Like to talk today is not so bad because I'm not having to sit down and write. I'm just talking to you. But I get so exhausted in the morning, and I put on tefillin, and then I start to pray, and then I give it up. It's very difficult.
Would you put them on and say the brachot?
I say all the brachot except for the Amidah. Also, I pick up the parts of the Amidah that I need, like Rafa'inu Adonai v'narafeh, Hoshienu v'nivsheh, Kitale Tena v'Furul, Kol Melechenu.
Right.
So that's the healing prayer. This is from the Jewish Review of Books in spring 2019. Nobody expects, and it comes from Michael Palin. Here's what I thought was in store for me as I grew old. I'd stay clear, strong, and energized through my 80s, keep writing stories, then I'd slow down, and so on and so on. But no, that's not what but it turns out, no, that's not what's in store. My analytical abilities, my understanding remain for now, but I've become unsure about everything. Have I been punished because I've often been intellectually arrogant, paid back for being a fool? I don't believe the world works that way, that God works that way. But who knows how the world works, how God works? And though worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God, from Job. What can that mean? My body is already destroyed. So I like this essay. It's kind of a rap. It's not a traditional essay at all. Every morning my first prayer, Moda Ani, offers thanks to God for awakening my soul once again. Great is your faithfulness. Awakening my body out of the dark of sleep, awakening my spirit, things of this world, things that seen in a holy light become holy. Who expects life in the form it arrives? The Spanish Inquisition knocks at the door. All my life, the Inquisitor has been waiting to burst in. Who knew? Now he enters with his case full of instruments. The essay is, I realize how comic it is. It's hard, and it doesn't deny the hardness of it, but it's also funny, and humor is one of the ways in which you can deal with this. Who knew? Here it is, like a kind of ghost. I can look from a distance upon my children, my wife, our friends, and love those I look upon. For a year, or God forbid, 10 years, I'll be an observer, standing far outside, above the living world, not hiding away in shame. I'll still visit my children, I'll still eat. The ghosts don't eat so much. Still cook with pleasure, still read books, though not so fluently. Maybe even write stories as I've done all my life, though now with more difficulty than I've ever faced. But secretly, inwardly, I'll be separate, taking in the world without acting in it. And then I quote Bellow, who in Augie March tells us, when striving stops, the truth comes as a gift. And I say that's a ghost's truth. But there is something good about not striving, about giving it up, just being.
So, do you have a sense, I mean, do you feel in some ways that whatever happens to us is part of some bigger plan, that God is directly involved in our...
No, I don't think so. Yes, I believe it.
Yea, though slay me, I still believe it.
Yeah.
In spite of it, you don't think so, but you believe it.
I believe it. I don't believe it. I believe it. It's not a logical trip. I remember when Josh died and I went to see Rabbi Edelman, and Rabbi Edelman said, you know, if God could come down and talk to you and say, what is this, you know, you want to know what this means. Here's what it means. And then he would explain, is there anything that God could say that would make you understand and feel okay about it? No. I mean, I said no, and he said, no, right. No, of course not. There's no. So it's a mystery. It's a mystery. You don't know. It's all the children are Isaac. And I can't find it.
Okay, but give me the sense of it. Just give me the sense of the story.
It's a child who's died in an auto crash in his senior year in college. And he's trying to cope with the loss of the son. But at the end, the last line is, all the children are Isaac, and sometimes the ram is not to be found. What a writer does is step into other people's shoes or clothing, and so on. So that's just the way it is.
In this story, you say something like, where
Reading to Jacob it's a nice story.
where the brother talks to the rabbi, and he says, I don't believe. And the rabbi says, belief doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I thought, perfect. You are so right.
Yeah, belief doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. And then you say,
he cleans the shtibel.
yeah, right. It's not a question of faith.
Or faith, not belief.
Yeah. There was something else you wrote, which I thought was very relevant to today. Laughing at ideologies and how people, we're stuck in a world now where people are stuck in ideologies. And you talked about disguising narcissism and one's personal chaos by becoming a true believer, so to speak.
Yeah, where is that? Where?
That's in the introduction to Wrestling with
Oh.
Yeah, in the preface.
But that's always been there.
Yeah, can you speak about that, about the world?
I think I was thinking about Cambridge's Sinking,
Oh, okay.
which was an old story, 1970, something, or 72. I mean, it was in Mass Review. Um, and the ideologies, Maoist, Stalinist, socialist, capitalist, whatever, the ideologies that sustained young people through the late 60s and early 70s has collapsed by 1973, 1974. And so there's nothing to hold their lives together. And the main character, I can't remember his name, is aware of this. There's a lifeboat in the middle, it's partly inflated, in the middle of the living room in Cambridge. And so he takes the lifeboat out to the water, and then he actually floats in it, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think so.
He brings it to a place where he can see his beloved. Well, that's kind of acting instead of believing. No, he doesn't. He's infected with the disease of ideology too, although he's given it up and he's conscious of giving it up, and he was trying to figure, well, what do I make a life out of now? What do I do with my life? And what is there? It's just you float your boat, and you love your lover, and there's not much else. But there's no sacred place to go to in that story, and that is a very early story.
Love your lover is also central to your story. The vagaries of love.
Sharon's central to my story.
Yes, she is. Can you speak more about that and how that?
Well, Sharon is my first reader, my editor, and my goad, and my without her I couldn't have done anything. And here she is.
Would you like to say a few words, Sharon, about yourself?
Well, John and I met because I was an editor and he sent me a story. So that was originally how we met, and that editorial writer relationship has lasted the 35 years of our marriage. And he's my favorite writer. And it's been really interesting in these recent days, you know, with the coming of the Parkinsons, to see writing is so central to John's life. Be able to be at his desk each morning at like 8:30 and to work through the morning is so central to who he is, how he exists. And it's been wonderful to sit here and listen to a discussion about the important things in his writing, which make him a very special writer, I think.
You yourself are a poet, and you've written many books. You've written an autobiography, I think, too.
Yeah, memoir.
A memoir.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's been quite a collaboration between
Yes,
you together.
yeah,
Quite a collaboration.
and John is, you know, my first reader as well. So it is collaborative. It's very mutual.
Now I'm trying to write a memoir, including the part that you've seen in the Jewish Review of Books. So it's not a chronological autobiography. It's memoir.
John, how do you get these? I mean, these stories are so incredible. They come from such a wealth of different backgrounds and people. I mean, how do you do this?
I've always been interested in psychology. I was a psych major in college, and I've been in psychoanalytic groups, and so I'm really, but it doesn't come out of that. I mean,
Where does it come out
but
of?
my interest in psychology expresses itself in the groups I've been in and so on. But where it comes out of longing, personal longing and personal struggling myself or seeing other people struggle.
So it's your own work on yourself, you're saying also, but when you craft a story, if I could ask, how does it all begin? Any of the stories, adult fiction, The Man Who Could See.
Adult fiction.
I love that story.
I love that story.
I love that. As a book dealer, I love that story. I relate to it.
And that story was, I had already started to write about a guy in Wellfleet. Actually, there is a person like this in Provincetown who puts a sign on the street from his jewelry shop, or at least there was, but put a sign on the street from the jewelry shop saying, minion needed, Jews, minion needed. And so I tried that. So I'm writing on this story, and then this guy comes into the story, and then 9/11 happens. And I realized I can't write a story at this point. I'd have to just throw it away because I can't think of anything else right now. It's right there. So 9/11 came into the story and made it a better story. It was the idea of a minion of people who all are suffering and who are trying to find meaning and who are grieving came into the story. And so there's the comic element in the story with the man who is grieving for his mother, but who meets the narrator's wife and has known her as a child, as a young girl. So there's that. But then there's the when she goes to New York and 9/11 happens. That story reads well. I mean, I used to like to read it aloud to people.
There's a certain serendipity of the story that I think, my
Yes.
God, he does a mitzvah. He does this great mitzvah, and he's paid back. He's paid back, in a sense, right? But on the other hand, you could say it was inevitable. The marriage wasn't working. So something would have happened, whether it was this.
That's true.
From the past.
That's true.
Then there's a story, 3 a.m., I think you call it.
A similar woman,
Yeah. These are
younger, but
these are women who have some damage, right? There's damage.
yes, narcissistic damage.
It seems to be pretty pervasive in our culture, is it not?
Yeah. I think I have good women in the stories too. Very supportive women. But
Do you have women as lead characters? Like redemption?
not in my short stories.
That is,
I don't think so. This is
which,
my first novel.
which is?
What Are Friends For?
Uh-huh.
And my editor gave this to me as a gift.
Uh-huh.
He put it into a binding. And in this story, each alternate chapter is by a man or a woman, man, woman, man, woman. So I've done that. I've made characters who are significant, but not since then have I done a woman prime point of view character.
Yeah, there are.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. It's the woman whose son is having trouble,
Yeah,
and she goes out with a man
in
from school.
Harvard Square.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Talk about some of your writings now, which we didn't mention. Yeah.
This is the story that has all the children arising.
Many seconds.
Many seconds into the future. This is my best collection.
Is it really?
I think so.
Wow.
Radiance, I like The Man Who Could See Radiance very much, and a couple of the other stories. But this one Many Seconds into the Future itself, the short story called Many Seconds into the Future, is very, very strong story about a man who's dying of cancer of the brain, and he's trying to set up his life for his death. And at the end, we see, I can't even talk about this story without getting teary-eyed. But at the end of the story, we see his children 10 years later. And the fact is that he's not gone, not because he's alive, he's dead, but something has happened in his dying that changes their lives. So that story I really like a lot. The Name Changer is a fun story. Do you remember that story?
I haven't read the description yet. Yeah.
Two of the stories have no religious component to them. Well,
Everything has.
everything has. Everything has. Straps and Boxes is a story in here which is about a guy who does tefillin and tallis every morning, and he's asked to go to school. He lives in the Berkshires. He's asked to go to his son's school to talk about his religion, as they've had a Muslim, they've had a Christian, and so on. And he brings in the tefillin and shows the kids how he wraps it up, and so on. Well, his son takes it out of later when he's alone, takes it out of the bag and plays with it and so on. And then it becomes a magic box. It becomes a magical box. It becomes a healing radio.
An amulet.
And it becomes an amulet and changes a kid's life.
That kid.
Yeah, not his son, but his son's friend.
Son's friend. Do you want to speak about the plight of the Jew today in the world, how you see things, or how this...
Well, I see an intensification of anti-Semitism, and that's something that I never expected to have to live in. But it's anti-Semitism on the right, anti-Semitism on the left, anti-Semitism. It's connected with. So on the left, it's connected with the politics of Israel. On the right, it's traditional. It's the traditional hatred of Jews and scapegoating of Jews and so on. I'm talking about, when I say the right, I mean white nationalists. So there's the white nationalists who've always hated Jews, but now it seems to be becoming semi-acceptable almost to talk about it. And the Jews want to clean it up because they want to be completely assimilated and just have the synagogue communal place, but to be completely assimilated. I'm not talking about my story, but I'm talking about Roth's story.
Right.
But there is a sense that Jews were completely assimilated and loved, enjoyed. And I thought that's where it would stay. I didn't realize that it would become, we haven't gotten to a place where they're breaking windows, but I can imagine it.
Tell me, if you would, something about your family, your children. Anything you'd like to say to them as part of this video. This is an opportunity.
I wasn't the perfect father, but I'm glad you're around to be perfect grown-ups.
Tell me about your children, if you would.
So I was 21 when I met my first wife in a drugstore in Broadway and 116th Street. And we were engaged 3 days later. She was 18. And we were married in a month and a half, 2 months. and we didn't know each other, and we'd never lived away from home, and so we fought, and turned out she's a terrific woman, and she was still in college. And we had a child the next year, a year later, Laura. So Laura is now deeply grown up. And she's an architectural designer in LA. And then we had Josh 10 years later. 10 years? 10 years later. And Josh became a singer-songwriter and was a beautiful soul and a spiritual writer, a spiritual person. And he and I used to speak on the phone about the Spirit, about God, all the time. So he wrote songs that they're not like anthems, not like Yay God, but trying to deal with feelings and spirit. So he would now be 51 years old. He died in 2000, January 2000, of cancer. And that's the hardest thing I've ever gone through. And then Sasha, who was a child of my second wife, and we only lived together for a few years. We had Sasha, and Sasha had just gotten married. Married to Sarah Shapiro. And then Sharon and I were together for a few years and finally had Aaron. And Aaron is now 28, going on 29. And he's a beautiful, you can take a look at some of the pictures here. You might be interested in seeing some of the pictures. But Aaron's in San Francisco creating a startup on teaching music through online music. I mean, teaching online people to read music, to understand chord structure, to know how to get ear training, and so on. And we're hoping that it succeeds.
Speaking about music,
Yeah,
music plays a big role in your stories.
it does.
There's Schubert in the background.
Mahler or Schubert?
There's Mahler, right. And then there's Miles Davis. Where does this come from? Were you brought up with lots of music? How did
No, I was brought up with nothing but Broadway tunes.
How did you discover this?
When I was in high school, music became one of the things that connected me to those who were rejected in the class. In other words, those who were the cool kids, the tough kids. And so music was one of the ways of binding me with those who were different.
It appealed to you. That group appealed to you. You
Yeah,
were different yourself.
yeah,
You were different yourself.
So a lot of our evenings would be spent together putting on these 78 records. The Bach B minor Mass is this big,
Yeah.
and now it's magic. It's in the air, all around us. So, yeah, I loved classical music, and I liked jazz, but classical music was what got me.
When you need soothing yourself, when you need self-soothing, who do you listen to? What pieces really...
It doesn't work that way.
Oh, how does it work?
I just mean I listen to music not because I'm trying to get comfort from it, but in my stories, the music becomes a signature or a way of expressing some feeling. The character may use it for comfort, but I don't.
Could you give me a quick sense of your progression? Sounds like you grew up in New York, went to school in Manhattan. High school.
I went to Columbia Grammar School,
Uh-huh.
which you see a variant of that in Mitzvah Man. The first chapter in Mitzvah Man talks about the school, that the character that Adam goes back to for a
reunion.
reunion.
Yeah, he takes on the bully. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was, I mean, my experience was I went to a public school, PS9
Uh-huh.
in New York, and then Columbia Grammar School.
Right.
Went to Columbia College. I wasn't ready to go to college, and I didn't really become an intellectual until I went to graduate school. I did really, really well in graduate school to get my doctorate.
You did that in Indiana, it sounds like?
Yeah, Indiana.
Yeah. And you did your doctorate on Saul Bellow?
I did and that became a book,
Uh-huh.
and the book became very successful, and critically, I mean,
Uh-huh.
and
And Saul Bellow was an influence on your writing?
he's definitely been an influence on my writing.
Okay.
He's my teacher. Even though we may not agree politically,
Uh-huh.
but I loved his work, and I saw how much you could do with language, how much you could play together different melodies, different music in the same story, in the same sentence. You could have slang and philosophical language. That's right out of Bellow. So I love Malamud stories. I love
I was thinking
Philip
of
Roth.
Malamud. When I read you, I also think of Malamud. And
So do I.
I think, frankly, you are the same, to me, you are on the same level of Saul Bellow.
Well, thank you.
I really feel that way.
And I like, and very much Peretz,
Paris.
I.L. Peretz,
Uh-huh.
and Sholem Aleichem, of course.
Yeah.
And then Henry James, and Edith Wharton, and D.H. Lawrence was a big hit for me.
Uh-huh.
So in graduate school, I studied modern literature.
Right.
Modern meaning from the end of the 19th century till now. And then I went from there to teach in University of Victoria, British Columbia for 1 year. Then for 1 year in Europe for the Army at University of Maryland courses. Then came back for 5 years to teach at BU in humanities, in music, art, and literature. Great program. And then John Silber came in and destroyed it. And then I came here to University of Massachusetts, and I've been here for all these years. I taught for about 35 years. Then I taught for a year in Mount Holyoke, a year at Hampshire College, another year at Mount Holyoke, and part-time work, because I love to teach. And now the Parkinson's would make it difficult to be fast and quick and alive the way I was when I was teaching. But like today, you probably wouldn't know that I was sick.
I wouldn't know. You're an inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.